Humanity is the new guy with something to prove. We got some respect by putting up a good fight against a much stronger power, and now we're muscling in for a bigger share of respect in the diplomatic game, hanging out on a colossal space station, jawboning with the big boys while we establish ourselves as a major player. I'm of course talking about Babylon 5. Now, I could just compare the Earth Alliance and the Systems Alliance, Babylon 5 and the Citadel, which is the wrong comparison. But while Mass Effect and Babylon 5 aren't the same story, they're stories about many of the same things. New powers supplanting the old, but having to make alliances to face a seemingly insurmountable threat. About inheriting consequences and balancing the needs of the one against the many on both an individual and a civilizational level. Mass Effect gives us an almost Lovecraftian foe in the Reapers, unstoppable mechanized space bugs that scourge the galaxy every 50,000 years, exterminating all the spacefaring civilizations, clearing the way for the primitive screwheads to stop stabbing each other with sharp sticks and go on to the stars in time for the next culling. They also exert a malignant influence, bending people to serve their ends and pave the way for the next coming of the Reapers, starting with Saren and Benizia in the first game and continuing on through the Collectors and the Elusive Man. The Reapers always have an indoctrinated front working on their behalf, which undermines the whole idea of the Reapers in some respects, but a game that's just running around in a panic waiting for the end to come wouldn't be much fun, so proxies it is. The Reapers begin as an implacable, almost unknowable force. While very different in terms of motivation, Babylon 5's shadows emerge in much the same way, rumor and legend bubbling up until the damage makes them an undeniable threat. Shepard and Sheridan alike both spend a lot of time trying to build alliances against this threat. There are lots of committee meetings. But more than just a young power trying to prove itself and stand with older, more established civilizations, these vastly older and more powerful forces like the Shadows, the Vorlons, the Reapers, make it effectively a world with vengeful gods in it. It's science fiction packaging, but there's an element of don't piss off Zeus in the foundation of these stories.
And we've learned that we can either stay out from underfoot or be stepped on.
Which is not a knock on them. It's notable that Star Trek, which is usually about suspiciously pure-level powers having to grapple with moral and diplomatic solutions rather than just shooting it out, has far more powerful space gods than either Mass Effect or Babylon 5. Q most famously, but the original series has several of these godlike interventions. Trelane, the Sorcerers, and Catspaw, and of course there's the treaty between the Federation and the Klingon Empire, not brokered between the powers, but imposed on them by the Organians. While Q is going to do what he wants and Picard just has to roll with it, the Reapers and the Shadows are potentially manageable threats. At the start of those conflicts, their goals are unknown, but they are knowable. They're acting as they are for reasons that make sense to them and that they can explain. And they do explain.
The others, the ones who live here, believe that strength only comes from conflict. They want to release our potential, not bottle it up.
That comprehensibility frames them as solvable problems. But let's just pin that to the wall for now. There are multiple small wars within the larger conflict with the Shadows, most notably the Centauri Republic attacking the Narn in order to re-establish control over what had previously been a brutally suppressed colonial possession. The colonial comparison is obvious. Some of the best parallels could be drawn between the Centauri occupation of Narn and Belgian rule in the Congo, for example, along with the many other influences at play in the story thread. But I don't think the colonial comparison is the best one. The tech gap isn't that big between the Narn and the Centauri, for one thing. The gap is more in logistics and overall military capacity. It has more parallels with the European invasions of the 1930s, most notably Poland. And I think this is quite deliberate. In the 2019 book, Becoming Superman, Babylon 5's creator, J. Michael Straczynski, tells his origin story, discussing some darker chapters of his family's history. It's his story and he tells it well, check out the book. But the short of it is that the war in Poland exerted a major influence on his family and, either consciously or not, on the Narn Centauri storyline. So, after bombarding the planet with mass drivers, the Centauri proceed to enslave and generally brutalize the Narn population. They don't call the planet Narnia, but I will. The local resistance forces have some outside assistance in the form of weapons being smuggled in. There's a lot of jawboning about the horror and injustice of it all, but no other power openly enters the conflict. In that sense, it's less Poland and more Czechoslovakia or Lithuania, someone else's problem. Of course, in this case, it's all a Russian doll of proxy wars, with outsiders feeding supplies to the Narn to fight the Centauri, who are in turn themselves becoming a proxy, allowing the Shadows to operate from their territory, even granting them a base on their homeworld. And of course, there's factionalism in the Minbari government, and Earth falls under the rule of a shadow-backed totalitarian regime. War is a messy affair, rarely fought along neat lines. Mass Effect plays with this a little too, though clumsily, with the Cerberus storyline. Unfortunately, Part 3 wasted the potential of a factional struggle within humanity while a human is out there trying to unite everyone else. But in both stories, the central threat is approached as an enemy with comprehensible goals that must be defeated by means other than brute force. Also important to note is that in both Mass Effect and Babylon 5, humanity is still traumatized by a war that we really shouldn't have survived. The Minbari were poised to wipe us out, but unexpectedly surrendered for their own reasons. Mass Effect has the first contact war with the Turians, one of the 3 civilizations with a seat on the Citadel Council, sort of the Security Council of the Space UN, and the Turians are known for their military might. Mankind put up a good showing in the early engagements, but we would have been overwhelmed had the rest of the Council not intervened. In both cases, humanity ends up on a much wider stage, still not quite a unified people, but viewed as a single block by everyone else. And we have something to prove, having come out of a war looking sort of like winners, but knowing that our survival was the result of some outside decision rather than our own merits.
We were beaten. We didn't stop them, they stopped themselves. And I wish the hell I knew why.
And in both cases, there's a single individual that, more than anyone else, represents humanity and sets the tone for interactions with the others. In Babylon 5, Captain Sheridan is the military leader, one of humanity's few heroes of the Earth-Minbari War, who brokers alliances with all the other powers and quite notably marries a Minbari, tying into a wider thread about the 2 peoples sharing souls. Together they forge an interstellar alliance, leading the varied civilizations of the galaxy, with a few notable exceptions, into a new age. Again, from many one, guided by mankind through the father figure of Sheridan. Or Shepard, even if you're playing a femshep. We'll come back to that. Mass Effect plays on these ideas with more layers, made possible by its role-playing game format. That alliance can take on a different tone depending on Commander Shepard's decisions. In the climax of the first Mass Effect game, you can commit Earth forces at the Citadel, and through this act of solidarity with the other races of the galaxy, show that humanity is a responsible member of the wider community and save the Council in the process. But the Council are the people you've spent the whole story up to that point trying to convince. They've disparaged you, dismissed you both personally and humanity collectively, and found ways to downplay or outright ignore whatever evidence you present to them. People are dying for their bad decisions. Isn't it only fair that they be among the chilly floating corpses? So you can save Earth's military might for the long struggle ahead and leave the Citadel Council to their richly deserved fate. Either way, mankind gets a seat on the Council and the galaxy starts to come together against a common foe. But this decision determines whether it's more in a spirit of chummy brotherhood or a newly minted big stick power bullying the others. The latter option naturally leads to a lot more resentment.
Why would human scavengers need guns? They only strike when their prey is weak. Like that time the Citadel was attacked by Geth and you killed the Council.
The game doesn't really let us go complete human supremacist overlord, but can't resist teasing it a little.
The new council must rule with a single voice. It must be assembled from one species alone, humanity.
Babylon 5 toys with the idea as well, in a brief moment of what if framed as historical revisionism.
The Interstellar Alliance is not here to be merciful to the weak.
Because we know it's the wrong choice, the evil option, but we're tribal creatures and it's too alluring to at least not consider it for a moment. And it's partly balanced by pairing the human action hero savior with a calm, more nurturing, non-human feminine counterpoint. The Sheridan-Delenn love story is central to Babylon 5's narrative arc. In Mass Effect, it's more subtle, with Liara serving that role. Even if you play a female Shepard and don't follow the Liara romance thread, the story forces it back around at the end to fill this very specific purpose. I read this as a symbolic mating. It's not the only interpretation, but it's a very strong one. In fact, calling it symbolic is probably downplaying it, given what Liara actually is. If we follow the two peoples becoming one idea that runs through Babylon 5 with the sharing of souls, Delenn's metamorphosis into a hybrid, their child, the Rangers, it's a constant theme. Mass Effect probably inadvertently subverts it, because Liara's people, the Asari, can't be hybridized. If Sheridan and Delenn represent the best of two worlds coming together to make something new embodying the best of both, Sheridan and Liara show humanity being subsumed. See, the Asari don't reproduce sexually in the way we understand it. Liara's child is 100% Liara's. Shepard's genetic contribution isn't in providing half the material, but merely serving as a genetic randomizer. The Asari use other species to increase their own genetic diversity without introducing non-Asari elements to it. So a full Shepard-Liara romance is a case of the Asari pulling the best, the most fit out of the human gene pool. Parasitical in a way. The blue tentacle-head woman is a trap. But there's a much bigger civilizational trap at the heart of these stories. In the case of Mass Effect, the Reaper Sovereign plainly explains that we're all herded into a specific technological path.
Your civilization is based on the technology of the mass relays. Our technology. By using it, your society develops along the path of the sweet desire.
In both stories, interstellar travel is leftover tech from some long-vanished civilization. Jump gates in Babylon 5 and mass relays in Mass Effect. But while the various civilizations of the Bab 5 universe have learned how to build their own jump gates, even build them into ships, the Mass Effect civilizations are reliant on the enormous relays that they've found. And when a new spacefaring race finds one, they sooner or later end up at the Citadel. The Citadel is truly ancient. It has survived more than one cycle of destruction, but how many more is unknown. It is maintained by the Keepers, these bugly dudes that just go about their tasks seemingly oblivious to anything happening around them. The Citadel is not only the hub of the mass relay networks, but a trove of technology and information. It's an obvious choice to become the seat of a multi-world alliance, neutral ground to which all the rising civilizations will eventually come. A galactic shelling point, you might say. But the Citadel is also a trigger.
If you go to Zahadu, you will die.
Yeah, let's pivot to the Shadows. They're a very old civilizations by our standards, but they are not among the first ones to populate our galaxy. And their homeworld draws the attention of an archaeological expedition eager to dig up advanced technology from the ruins of an apparently long-dead civilization. Only they're not gone, just napping, biding their time for the next round of war against their old enemies, the Vorlons. See, while the Shadows are all about accelerating evolution through conflict, making all the younger civilizations fight each other in a Nietzschean deathmatch across the stars, the Vorlons are in the follow our lead and we'll show you the way camp, trying to be everyone's space dad. Just as the Reapers force civilization into the same technological development path over and over, the Shadows and Vorlons force the same ideological split, order versus chaos. They keep asking the same questions. Who are you? What do you want? Forcing aside other paths and other questions. Forcing the narrative development of the younger civilizations, just as the Reapers forced the technological development. The conflict in Babylon 5 has the better ending, with Sheridan forcing them to confront their own assumptions and refusing to play their us or them game. Mass Effect ends up relying on a technological solution, a plot device.
Device?
A weapon, massive in size and scope, that's capable of unquantifiable levels of destruction.
Game 3 is well known for having some weak points in the writing. But one thing remains constant. Just as Sheridan must go to Zahadum, even though he goes to his death, so must Shepard, one way or another, die at the Citadel. I know there's the Control ending where Shep's consciousness maybe lives on.
Through his death, I was created.
Through my birth, his thoughts are freed. They guide me now.
Of course, there's that little breath at the end of the game if you play it just right. But for all practical purposes, Shepard is not walking away from this. Let's talk Messiah narratives for a bit. Mass Effect 2 begins with Shepard being killed in a rather contrived intro cinematic, so the story can happen kind of thing, and is then resurrected by Cerberus to save mankind. But again, it's a technological fix. The resurrection is achieved through medical science, cybernetics, expensive techno-wizardry. Babylon 5 gives us a more mystical, in some ways more traditional take on it. Sheridan is brought back to life in the depths of Zahadum. Very strong journey through the underworld symbolism, and given enough time to finish his task.
I cannot create life, but I can breathe on the remaining embers.
Sheridan had 20 years of life left after the war. Babylon 5 gets into the idea that in some ways winning the war is the easy part. It's building a stable peace from the shattered remnants of the old world that takes a rare combination of foresight, empathy, and guile. While the 5th season is probably no one's favorite, it explores the difficulty of building new institutions, the dirty loose ends of war, and the fact that even after an epic struggle spanning across the stars, life goes on in fairly mundane ways. Mass Effect ends, one way or another, with Shepard's effective death. Even the Control ending is kind of dead Shep. A few slides give us a short-term view of what follows, but for the most part, the story ends with Shepard in the rubble and leaves us with a sort of summer of 1945 ending. The war's over and everything's wrecked. Unless you pick the let the cycle continue ending, but why? There's a constant theme of inheriting the mistakes of our elders. The Shadows and Vorlons distort the evolution of a galaxy with their cyclical proxy wars. The Reapers, built to cull the galaxy to prevent...
Without us to stop it, synthetics would destroy all organics. We've created the cycle so that never happens. That's the solution.
A technological singularity, not to put too fine a point on it. Too fine a point? Singularity? Really? Mass Effect gives us that same idea on a smaller scale with the Quarians and the Geth, a people driven out of their home by their own creations, turning their children into wandering refugees. This constant theme of inheriting problems and having to deal with them. Babylon 5, of course, ends with retribution following them home. The Centauri again become puppets, this time to a bitter shadow minion, and Earth is hit with a plague, leading to the short-lived spin-off Crusade. In the case of Mass Effect, well, I'll admit I'm not optimistic about Mass Effect 5, partly because I don't see a good way of following that story without choosing a canon ending, even if there really is only one that makes sense, and I get the impression that BioWare doesn't want to do that. But like Babylon 5, there's a new world waiting after the war. Not only are the old narratives and institutions shattered, but in many cases the worlds are actual ruins. One interesting possibility. Just as Babylon 5 deals with the older civilizations moving on, getting out of the way, letting the younger grow into their own, Mass Effect has several second-tier powers that perhaps find themselves relatively well off compared to the hard-hit Council races. Turians, Solarians, Asari, and even the brash and arrogant newcomer humanity could find themselves suddenly having to take the Volus and the Elcor much more seriously. But these are human-centric stories for obvious reasons, creating an opportunity for humanity as the young and barely united people, our self-insert, to take up a real leadership role, building up a new galactic civilization in partnership with the others that haven't had the prospect of a world-ending war in centuries or millennia.
Need I remind you that the last time we fought the Reapers, Shepard sacrificed the Council to protect human interests?
Our crudeness, our newcomer status, and our recent history of fighting amongst ourselves becomes a strength rather than a hindrance. It puts humanity in an ideal position to show the way forward from war and ruin. Only the Alliance can get this shit done. And maybe we need stories like that. Stories about questioning grand narratives, about overcoming immense evil in epic battles, but without a happily ever after ending. No handing out medals and cut to credits, but rather changing gears from fighting a war to building a better world in the aftermath, dealing with the dirty consequences of war. Babylon 5 and Mass Effect are both kind of the missing part of Star Trek, what Enterprise couldn't quite allow itself to be. A story of humanity as a barely functional family putting on a good front for outsiders, stepping into a role we're not really ready for, and doing it anyway. Stories where we don't have to become a race of enlightened do-gooders to do great things, because we already have it in us.
I want to look up into your lifeless eyes and wave like this. Can you and your associates arrange that for me, Mr. Morton?